Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Now, North Korea has again been held to account by the United Nations for its truly abysmal human rights record. Reports by the US and others estimate anywhere between 100,000 to 200,000 North Koreans are, at this very moment, detained as political prisoners inside the regime. Just last week, for the 17th year in a row, the UN General Assembly Third Committee adopted a resolution slamming what it described as the North's long-standing and systematic violations of human rights. Now, it was adopted by consensus. That means that all member states agreed to it, but no vote was cast.
Also, for the third straight year, South Korea did not co-sponsor the report and played no role in drafting it. For more, we connect to Mark Barry, a North Korea expert and the associate editor of the International Journal on World Peace. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
Now, the North's human rights abuses are well documented. However, given the regime's secrecy, estimates are likely just scratching the surface. Considering what the world knows, why has South Korea been taking such a hands-off approach for the past 3 years?
Because after a year of fire and fury in 2017, on January 1st of 2018, Kim Jong-un announced that he had achieved his goals with the testing of ICBMs and nuclear weapons. And you had the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang. And so that was a tremendous window of opportunity. And it led to the Inter-Korean Summit on April 27th. It led to the Singapore Summit on January 12th. And it led to further summitry and raised hopes that really continued through most of 2019. So if South Korea had emphasized its support of UN human rights resolutions against the North in 2018, these summits would never have occurred in the first place, despite their lack of success later on.
Right, and as we mentioned, this is the 17th year in a row that such a report has been drafted by the UN, slamming the regime. North Korea, as per usual, did its usual verbal protesting, and its various allies in the UN kind of backed it up. But rarely does anything really come of these reports. What significance, if any, do you think they have?
Well, you know, human rights pressure needs to be applied in diplomacy because in the case of the Soviet Union, for example, in the 1970s, such pressure had a distinct impact and became one of the baskets in the Helsinki Accords. And human rights pressure forced the USSR to ease up on its treatment of political dissidents and political prisoners. But generally, human rights pressure tends to serve as a bargaining chip, such as in security negotiations. So I think that's its usefulness. But this year is notable because the draft resolution singles North Korea out for not vaccinating its own people against COVID. And of course, I think they deliberately have done that in order to, partially because they couldn't develop their own vaccine, but also as a way to strengthen their own internal controls.
Now, Mark, for our international viewers who might not be aware, what kind of human rights abuses does the regime engage in? And if you were to line up the world's worst offenders, China, Syria, failed states in Africa, where would you rank North Korea?
Well, last year's official UN Security Council resolution, which was December of last year, said that individuals in the DPRK are stripped of nearly all their human rights, freedoms of expression, peaceful assembly, association, movement, and religion or belief, among many others, that media freedom is non-existent, and neither is there any possibility of a political opposition to the regime's tight grip on its people. Now, in my view, the worst abusers, it depends how you want to categorize them. In terms of sheer numbers of people affected, I would say China, especially now in Xinjiang province and with the Uyghur people. North Korea, in terms of proportion of the population, you could say 95, 98, 99%. But I think in terms of the sheer outright horror of human rights abuse, I would say Syria, because so many of its people have been starved and bombed by their own government because it would consider people in a certain district to be rebels.
Right, so it's certainly a very complicated issue indeed, and all those countries in their own way, just terrible human rights abuses all around. But finally, North Korea has, for many decades now, been essentially getting away with these crimes against humanity with little more than a slap on the wrist, a symbolic one at that. Is there, in your view, any way countries like South Korea, the US, or Japan perhaps, they can group together and try and make a real difference, or will just day-to-day life for millions of North Koreans just continue to be this abject misery?
I think there's no choice, and you kick the can down the road, as has been done since the 1970s. But my belief has been in the benefit of economic and diplomatic normalization with North Korea, getting North Korea to see the benefits of improving its people's economic lives without giving up the rule of the Korean Workers' Party. Kim Il-sung, before he died, was looking very closely at Deng Xiaoping and what he was doing in China, trying to see if there was some way he could apply that to the North Korean situation. And unfortunately, he didn't live much longer after he was looking at that. But there's also a way to counterbalance through diplomatic recognition the overbearing Chinese influence on North Korea. So the best outcome is for the US and Japan to move toward diplomatic recognition of North Korea and allow South Korea to have unhindered economic and political cooperation with the North. The side effect of this should be to allow North Koreans to have economic freedom and more access to outside information. That's my conviction.
All right. As always, we thank you for your insights despite this depressing nature of the topic. That was Mark Berry, Associate Editor of the International Journal of World Peace, on North Korea's human rights abuses and the world's response to them. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for having me.